And it's a brand new week, and so it's time to do 55 minutes of business. We have 5 opportunities to do that. From today, this is what we have prepared for you. Nigeria's inflation is up again, and this time it looks like the rate of increase is increasing. And then in Kenya, more levies, more taxes. The people are complaining. Tanzania is planning to increase its food storage. Everybody is looking for food security. Good afternoon. Welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Ini John Mekwa. We would normally start from the global space, and that's where we're starting from today. Oil prices fell for a second day as the dollar gained ground, and political uncertainty in the United States following that attack on the U.S. presidential candidate, Mr. Donald Trump, while investors are eyeing progress of talks for Gaza ceasefire. Brent's futures fell 55 cents, that's about 0.7%, to $84.48 a barrel. For WTI, it's also down 0.7% to $81.65 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate, that's it. And the dollar firmed on Monday, while U.S. bond futures slipped as investors waged the attack on Trump and made victory in the upcoming presidential election more likely. The US dollar is expected to be a beneficiary of the assassination attempt on former President Trump as it increases the chances of his re-election. These are observations of some market analysts. A stronger dollar, as we know, tends to lower oil prices as buyers using other currencies have to pay more for their dollar-denominated crude. Last week, Brent fell more than 1.7% after 4 weeks of gains, while WTI futures slid at 1.1% as weak oil demand in China, which is the world's top importer, countered robust summer consumption in the United States. And going from there now, from the oil space, we come to Nigeria, still discussing oil, but the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited has said that it has decided not to add to its earlier investments in the 650,000 barrels per day Dangote refinery. The NNPCL spokesperson, Olufemi Shonaye, disclosed this in a statement, reacting to, that statement from the president and the CEO of Dangote refinery that NNPC now has a stake of 7.2%, contrary to the 20% stake that was earlier in the news. It can be recalled that NNPCL invested about $1 billion in the Dangote refinery for a 20% stake in the purchase agreements, but obviously payment was not made. We're still discussing Dangote now. The president and chief executive officer of Dangote Industries Limited, Alhaji Aliko Dangote, has disclosed that fertilizer supply to African countries will commence in 2 weeks. Mr. Dangote stated this when he took senior journalists on a tour of the refinery and Dangote fertilizer plants in Ibeju, Lekki, Lagos. As Nigeria moves to improve food security and drive down prices, fertilizer availability is crucial to boost yields for farmers. Meanwhile, the World Ranks Fertilizer Prices Index remained relatively stable during the second quarter of 2024, following a 20% drop in the first quarter. The index is 24% lower than it was a year ago, primarily due to significant decline in phosphate rock prices. And talking about prices there, in June 2024, headline inflation in Nigeria increased to 34.19%. That's relative to May 2024, where headline inflation was 33.95%. Looking at the movements now, the June 2024 headline inflation rate showed an increase of 0.24% when compared to the May 2024 headline inflation rate. On month-on-month basis, the headline inflation rate in June was 2.31%, which was 0.17% higher than the rate recorded in May 2024. Then it was 2.14%. This means that in the month of June 2024, the rate of increase in the average price level is higher than the rate of increase in the average price level in May 2024. On a year-on-year basis, the headline inflation rate was 11.40 points higher compared to the rate recorded in June 2023, which was 22.79%. This shows that the headline inflation rate year-on-year basis increased in the month of June 2024 when compared to the same month in the preceding year. Furthermore, on a month-on-month basis, the headline inflation rate in June 2024 was 2.31%. That was 0.17% higher. So, of course, it's still a worrying trend back here in Nigeria that inflation is still increasing. And one of that especially is the food inflation, which is a leading cause. I did see that when they look at the division in the inflation numbers, beverages, food and beverages, went up about 17.7%. That's why, as on our sister program earlier today, Sunrise Daily, the Minister of State for Agriculture was a guest there. And of course, my colleagues, they'd ask him some very important questions. Let's take a bit of that.
Agriculture has time frame. Now, a lot of production is ongoing currently. We're in the rainy season. And if you look at the fields, there's a lot of cropping going on. Those croppings are not food. They will only translate to food after like 3 months, depending on the period in which they take to, get, it to be harvested. So until then, definitely this story that you are talking about will continue, because are we having enough? It's not all the food that we reserve, for example. It's only the cereals, the staples, that are very easy to be reserved in our, what do they call it? And that's why, definitely as a program, as a government, the aspect of post-harvest, for example, is a major issue. And we are looking at so many programs now that will help us to intervene in the post-harvest sector, where, for example, just like you rightly said, the price of Irish potato has come down because harvest has started. Now, that of so many other commodities will continue to come down as the harvest period come on board. That will take some time. So, and that explains why, until that happens, you are taking stories, because for the Nigerian, he's talking about now, this very minute. And so we admit there is a problem, but then what are we doing to solve the problem? That is what is important.
Yeah, so the Minister of State for Agriculture, they're saying they agree that there's a problem, and, trying to tell us we have a little bit of relief because it's harvest period. So when it's non-harvest period, we are back to, the squeezing time. And there are some worrying trends, when you talk about food security in the country. For instance, reports indicating that farmers pay the criminals, to access farms, to access their farms during the period of harvesting, during the period of planting. Those are very important issues, that is threatening, our food security in this country. 1 year after the president declared that a state of emergency on food insecurity in the country, we are still here. Well, it's a continuous conversation, and we will talk about it. Now we're also going to talk about youth skills development. Perhaps if we had more youths in the agriculture sector, they will bring some of those innovative strategies, and that will help to boost food supply in the country. But we'll talk about that after this break. Do join us again. we cannot give up until we have adequate food supply in the country. It's our vision, it's our passion. We need to eat to stay alive and work. Now let's see if one way would be to introduce or, attract more youth into the agricultural space. Perhaps that would be the answer to it. We'll discuss youth skills development now with Rosemary Chikoya. She's the executive director of Ladi Memorial Foundation. She's also the coordinator of National Sewing Championship. Thank you so much, Ms. Oshikoya, for your time. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon and happy World Youth Skills Day 2024 today.
We wish you the same. And we're just wondering if perhaps if we had more youth in the agriculture sector, we would be talking less about food insecurity in the country. What's your take on this, especially since you're having to deal with a lot of youths in recent times?
The basic need of man is food, clothing, and shelter, like we said. And just like you rightly said, we can have no life if we do not have food. And so getting everybody involved in the value chain for agriculture is really very important at this time. Because if we all have to eat, then we need to find strategies and innovative ways of making that sector very attractive for everybody. And what more topical day than today, that is the World Youth Skills Day. Nigeria has a predominant population of young adults. We know the statistics already. And then the question now is, if Nigeria has more of the adults, young adult population, how much of that segment of our population is contributing to feeding everybody? They have the most of the strength, they have the vigor, they have more of the education, you would want to say at that time, because we're talking of the Z generation, we're talking of the X generation, and all of them lump into that. And a lot of them, expectedly by the Nigerian policy of education, should be in school. So if everybody is in school and school farms are working, and we have more of agric entrepreneurs from that level and from that class, then like every other country in the world, we should have no food problems. And if we are still having food problems, then we need to go back again and rethink again what are the ways we need to get more hands into agriculture, how much more of the technology and the space we have for agriculture do we need to revamp. And that would be where we should focus more of our attention as a country and as a people.
Yeah, so we've heard about tweaking the curriculum to put in more skills acquisition subjects and courses and all of that, but it does seem like when it comes to theory, we may have it right there, but the practice of it, perhaps even the tools to practice and all of that, it seems that we haven't gotten there yet.
I would like to agree with you in that regard, so to speak, because the critique from all of us and the critique from most of the stakeholders is the fact that there's been more of theoretical learning alternative to practical. But I think the reality we have in Nigeria now, we need to focus more attention on the practical. For instance, how does school farm start? I remember when I was in school, I wouldn't remember if that was common with you, but at that time, every space within the school compound is supposed to have school farm. And at certain points, each individual student is required to cultivate a portion of land, grow that, and stories were abound from generations before mine would tell you how school communities are able to produce enough staple food to take care of themselves and also augment. We have moved away from that one. I think for me, the question now is how do we get back there? And getting back there means that it's going to be a lot more cost intensive. But I think if we want to get to improve more on the practical side of skills in school, we will need to see more significant investments in school infrastructure, technical, vocational structures as you have that. A lot of videos have been making around in the social media. You've seen a couple of them and many Nigerians have. You will find that an average school outside Nigeria spend a lot more time, students at every level, including primary school, having opportunity to do things with their hands. In education, you would say that is motor skills, that you need to connect the hands, the brain, and the mind of the individual to all function at the same pace. But if the child, from the time the child commences education, say from the mother's home, You do not do things that has to connect your mind, your brain, your sense, and all of that together in one space. The child gets to think that all of us have to just grow up and all we just need to do is to push pen. And that is a bit of the challenge we have. And I think if you ask me, that has to be something that all stakeholders will have to pay attention to. It has to be that everybody takes their pocket. Look at the school buildings as we have them today. School buildings are basically just some empty classrooms that possibly do not even have chairs for children to sit down. And so when we talk about skills in that regard, a lot of our attention gets focused on literacy skills and we get into curriculum development. But from our investigation so far, if you take a close look at that, you would find that even when some elements of skills are there in the curriculum, they appear to be some semblance of checklist item and not really cultivated at what practical outcome do you have. Let me give you an example. Nigerian curriculum says before a child leaves school, junior secondary school, the child should have functional livelihood skill. That is what basic education equips the child for. And by that argument, you expect that the child who would leave junior secondary school at the age of 15 could function in Nigerian society as an artisan. That child could be a bricklayer, the child could be a tailor, the child could be a baker. But in real sense, we find that there's a mismatch between that. So rather than begin to argue just on curriculum alone, which becomes another debate of developing curriculum and then there's no end to developing that, there is already trade curriculum standards that are available in Nigeria. MNEC has a couple of them. Under the National Skill Qualification Framework, we see NBTE has those across the sector. So why not we move a leap from talking about curriculum to actually talking about implementation of those skill standards we have? And talking about the access that are available, speaking of agri skills. In terms of agri skills, how many schools in Nigeria have school farm? How many students in school? Because agriculture is mandatory when a child is in basic education. Check the curriculum. But that curriculum aspect that is there, do we require that the child is trade certified? That their minimum benchmark we expect the child should have in terms of practical outcome? So I think curriculum is not as much of the problem as much as applying them and setting out of the box criteria that says you have to get certified. You have to have cutting edge skills. For instance, Bangladesh. You don't really have to go to school in the formal sense of it, but then that country seems to produce more of the garment that the whole of the world seems to use. If we go to London to shop, and most of the clothes are produced in Bangladesh, the tailors sit in their homes in small circles. Informal skill centers are contributing so much to that multi-trillion-dollar sector you call garments making in Nigeria. And if it is compulsory that our children in school also are required to have that competency, even at basic and junior secondary school, then we'll have to shift the conversation to say, possibly it's how are we contributing to the economy? How viable are the schools in terms of, if we see the schools as investments where every learner is an apprentice, and when government puts the structure for skill centers in every of those schools school students, as we have experimented in some of the pilots we have done as organization, we would see that we are actually ready for that. So I think we have to move at this point of our development from means and hope and dreams to means and ways of how do we actually get everybody farming? How do you get every child producing? Then you have to incentivize the process and make it more attractive for them to get into the skills we are talking about.
All right, Mr. Oshikoya. Mr. Oshikoya, so let me just help us. Because in this day and age, I know you did say when we were growing up, of course, we had farms and things like that. But, things or the trends seem to have evolved. So now it is ICT. You see, every child can operate a tab, a laptop and everything. So how do you balance that with these survival skills you're talking about in reality?
I will take you to one of the conversations we had about Finland some years ago. Finland was topping the world chart about being the best country, so to speak, education. And you will find that for most of these countries we sort of applaud, the children are very good in skills, yes. They are very good in computer and the rest of them. But at the same time, education is also fashioned in such a way that the fact that the child is going to play with the computer does not mean the child will not spend time in nature and learning about plants. And these countries we're also talking about who champion having multimedia and all of that for education is still the same country that still require that each child go through, as part of the mandatory condition for you graduating, a child has to do a practical project. Take, for instance, we talk about prom so much in Europe and America and the rest of them. But you've seen most often than not that the girl who is going to attend prom, some of them actually construct the garments themselves. So this multi-track education that is not just theoretical is what we are saying, ma. For instance, in school, a child in basic education, let me start from there, because when I get into secondary education, you expect that the developmental milestone of that child had come to the point where the child is already more matured and is able to handle more of those competencies we are saying. But at basic education, how do you incentivize a child? Because again, basic education is where the decision of what career path the child will go to comes in. When the child leaves junior secondary school, the decision of whether he goes to humanities, whether he goes to the core technical, or he just wants to do any of the any of the other skilled area is decided when the child is in basic education. So if that child is in school, and the average school, again, to put that in context, the average school student in Nigeria, out of our population of 210, and the percentage that is for that, most Nigerian average child have not touched a computer. And you could take that in the take a census of most of the public schools around you. So since we know most of our children are in those public schools, so public schools that do not have school structures and do not have workshops and do not have anything whatsoever other than the bench, and sometimes the bench do not exist, certainly would not do that. But you see, if we paste the arguments on whether the child is able to read or write, and we don't say, well, if you're not cut out and maybe we have issues with education, the child could also do well in skills. So why don't we give the child a dual education of a sort?
All right.
Because if you look at most of the census now, Nigeria has a population of over 40 million children out of school. The data keep changing, so we don't know which is correct as at present. But of these schools, and very recently we have the Almajiri Commission, and we talk about all the reasons why the children are out of school. But what if we shift this conversation into skills? What can you do with your hands?
So
and then we do not then require that we are benchmarking the standard of a child based on whether you can read and write, but how much of the children could be able to do most of those talents we need to find around us.
All right, Mr. Shikaya.
How many of our children needs to be given opportunity?
All right, Mr. Shikaya, I must tell you, I am reluctant to stop this, but it's time, and it's live TV. We do have other segments. And I do believe with this passion you have exhibited as an NGO that you would also push the frontiers to try to... I know one of that, obviously, is your sewing competition, or that's you're planning as a way of instilling skills on the youth. And we do wish you the best. And we'll certainly invite you back to the program, or one of our programs, to discuss your progress in this area. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Shikoya.
Thank you for the opportunity to engage issues on the World Youth Skills Day today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Quite passionate there, but I mean, sometimes we just have to postpone some of those interesting conversations, which is what we're doing. But we're postponing to move to the market because it's also an important one. And we see we're coming in her red, but thankfully that's not the color of the market. The market is really green.
It's green.
And it's a follow-up from what we closed with on Friday.
It's a follow-up, but the week ended in the red.
Yeah, because we had four negative trading days.
It was a miracle we had that bull come up, showed his face on Friday.
Yeah.
Just, saved face for some of us.
Like, okay, I think it was just investors checking to say, prices have really
gone low. Let's take advantage of the dip.
Advantage of this and hop into one or two stocks.
Yes, and we did see that market still close negative, but thankfully we're seeing a rebound at intraday. Hopefully that is sustained.
Yeah, well, I will be happy until we get back to 100,000.
Oh well, let's keep our fingers crossed. Hold your breath. So let's begin as always with major equities in Africa. We see sentiments at intraday were mostly negative. Nigeria's NGX was the lone gainer there. It was up by 0.17%, but at midday it was 0.13%. Still strong. Well, slightly strong, moderately strong at intraday, but this was lifted by gains in the banking stocks. Now, looking at South Africa, we see it at intraday down 0.3%. Elsewhere, Egypt's EGX30 was also down at intraday, 0.43%. But let's look at Kenya's close for Friday. It was in the green, 0.32%. But let's get a deeper dive now into intraday activities at the NGX. Onose Associe Naolo, investment analyst, Main Street Capital, joins us. Good afternoon, Onose. Before we dive into intraday markets and see what activities are driving stocks and stocks that we need to look at, let's look at stocks that moved the market last week, especially stocks that gained, stocks to watch. We look at the screen now, we see stocks like livestock, the top 3 gainers for last week. We saw livestock taking the lead there, up 27.03%. It opened the week last week, 1 naira 85 kobo and closed at 2 naira 35 kobo. That's a very big leap for that stock. And, we all know why that's, livestock ministry is working there possibly. And now, Associated Bus Company, it's opened at 64 kobo and closed at 77 kobo. And then we have that 20.31% uptake for that. And Ether, oil and gas, opened at 15 naira 20 kobo to close at 18 naira. And we see that 18.42% uptake for that stock. Let's look at it. We just don't have gainers. We have those that we are the bottom, the bottom 3. So we have that. So top losers, we have Africa Prudential opening at 9 naira and closing at 7 naira 40 kobo, having that massive drop there. And Thomas Wyatt opened at 2 naira 40 kobo, closed at 2 naira 16 kobo. And we have PZ Cousins opening at 22 naira, closing at 19 naira 80 kobo. Onose, what do you have to say about these stocks? Why do we see livestock for 2 consecutive sessions now, 2 consecutive weeks, leading the trend in that massive uptick?
Hi, Will. Thanks for having me. So for livestock specifically, with the news of the president wanted to create a new Ministry of Livestock. Now that news has been received with a little bit of there's been some controversy about around the news. Some people say the ministry, we already have an agricultural ministry. Why do we need a new ministry of livestock? But whether or not it's controversial, it shows one important thing, that the government at this point in time is really looking into agriculture and food security. And if they are looking into these things and they are willing to start making efforts, to secure food and to even boost food production, then it means companies that are really keyed into that provide some sort of infrastructure, are going to really they stand to benefit the most from that. And then we see, livestock feed. The company, they have, at least they claim to have a global distribution network for livestock feed. So if we have a situation where, the agricultural sector in the entire country is being lifted up, the government is making, really conscious efforts to lift, that sector up, then it stands to reason that, the company is going to gain significantly. And then, investors know this, investors anticipate this. And, you look at the stocks price and even the technicals, you see a lot of really, really huge green candles. So if this is whether or not the Ministry of Agriculture thing really flies, the point is that we know that the government really wants to get into agriculture right now. So companies like livestock feed, they tend to gain. Okay, so but the other.
Now looking at the livestock feed, looking at intraday numbers, want to know how they're doing at intraday. Livestock was down at intraday. Profit taking?
Nothing goes up forever, so when you have really strong bullish moves like that, especially that are triggered by news events, you will expect that people who have, profited from that will, cash in their chips and take profit. So it's normal to see livestock trading lower, today.
Okay, so moving on, the CBN governor, we just want to check in on the recapitalization drive. The CBN governor, Mr. Yemi Cardoso, did say that excluding retained earnings leveled the playing field for the banking sector. Now, the playing field is leveled. How are the stocks faring?
Banking stocks are actually doing pretty okay. Now, it depends from bank to bank. Banks that have announced, their recapitalization efforts, are doing, a little bit better than banks that haven't. Like if you see Fidelity's price, now we're not seeing really strong green candles, but we are seeing a gradual move upwards. I believe it should be trading around higher than 11 naira today. GTCO, this morning they released their announcements, 9 billion shares, at 44 naira 50 kobo each, and so we see GTCO trading favorably, today, and even Access Bank, releasing their announcement. So we see that generally, despite even the fear of dilution, we see that investors are positive, reacting positively to the bank's recapitalization efforts. I do not believe that most of the major banks that we see, tier 1 banks and, really strong banks with really strong potential like Fidelity, I do not see, a problem with them raising funds. We've had investors come to us to ask us, what we think about, Fidelity Bank. So we see a positive, it's really a positive event, positive things going on, and we see that reflected in the prices. So for banks that have started, we see an increase in their prices. Now we're not saying that this increase in price it could purely be event driven like we see with livestock, but we know that in the short term, yes, we expect some dilution. Like for example, GTCO, that's like a 23% dilution, compared to existing shares.
Okay.
But in the long run, we expect that this is a really positive event for even price and
Definitely would always keep track and see how this develops, especially for banking stocks. Thank you so much, Onose Asotie, now investment analyst, Main Street Capital, for joining us on Business Incorporated.
Thanks for having me.
So now let's look at other stocks. We're looking at the Gulf region, the Middle East, which were mixed at intraday. Abu Dhabi's index was down 0.24%, was mixed sentiments there. Dubai was up 0.04% at intraday. Still within the region, Saudi was up 0.34%. And this was as investors turned to focus on the U.S. Federal Reserve's interest rate cuts. Now, Qatar was also up 0.424%. Now, Qatar news there, we see that the index, that's the exchange, recorded the best monthly returns in the Gulf in the month of June. The index soared in almost all sessions last month, posting its highest monthly gain this year, supported by robust domestic buying. Rebound in natural gas prices also strengthened the sentiments in the markets. Now, the benchmark index came close to breaching 10,000 points, but trended slightly downward by the end of the month to close with a gain of 7% at 9,900 points. Now let's look at the U.S., where stock futures are higher in overnight trading. We see the Dow Jones up 0.55%. S&P 500 futures is also up 0.42%. NASDAQ futures up 0.49%. And this is also driven by earnings reports coming in there. We see reports coming from Goldman Sachs with revenue today coming in at $12.73 billion. Earnings per share, $8.62. That's a big one. We're also expecting earnings reports from Netflix, and we're also expecting from other big financial companies in the country. Let's look at Asia now, what the market is doing there. Very quickly, we see that Asian markets, we see the Nikkei is closed for a holiday, was closed at 41,190 points. The Kospi in South Korea is up 1.14%, and the Hang Seng index in China is down massively, 1.52%. And investors are looking to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, and that is shaking a bit of sentiments there. We're seeing some of that, and also, China's GDP numbers coming in lower than expected, but that didn't stop the numbers. Let's look at Shanghai index. We see it up 0.09%, closed at 2,974 points. S&P ASX 200 was also up 0.73%, and that's in Australia. So markets are not doing badly, especially with the news of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, and that really, investors are watching to see what's going to happen next. How investors are
did you see sharp movement on Bitcoin after that news.
It was just like, why is the market trending up after that news?
Because Trump is a crypto lover, I guess.
Okay.
All right, Will, thank you so much for that. Let's head to Berlin now. Hey, it seems it's Sports Friday. We talked about sports and we saw England fail to take the cup home over the weekend. That was yesterday. I wish Juliana was here. But I've seen what the sentiment is like. But anyways, there's still plans now. It's for the Paris Olympics, and that's just less than 2 weeks away. So it's a whole lot happening right there in the EU when it comes to sport. This time around, it's the airlines that are reporting the events. What will it mean to them? They're saying it might hit their revenue. I thought it would be the other way around. We have Emily now joining us from DW to give us the bigger picture. Hi, Emily. Good afternoon. So what's this about airlines and their fares?
Thanks for having me. Well, it may seem counterintuitive at first, but the reality is that while the Olympic Games are expected to draw somewhere between 2.5 to 3 million people to Paris, most tourists and travelers are going to try to avoid the city during this 2-week period. They're likely going to choose traveling to another European city or just postpone a visit to Paris to late August and September when they know they'll be able to avoid the excessive crowds as well as the high hotel and restaurant prices. Some analysts expect hotel prices to be as much as 45% higher during the Olympic Games in Paris. And so that's, part of why Delta is saying that it's expecting to take a loss in revenue of around 100 million euro during this period. And that's a big hit, but Delta says it's confident that it can recuperate that loss in the preceding few months, primarily because summer travel demand has been strong due to built-up demand post the pandemic. I mean, in June and last month, Delta generated revenue that was nearly 5.5% higher than it did in June of last year in 2023. And so that means that their operating revenue this June was around 15.5 billion euros. So a loss of 100 million isn't going to break their bank, though they'll have to make up for it later. And Delta isn't the only airline expecting a loss. At the start of the month, the Air France KLM group, they also reported that the Paris Olympics was likely to give a blow to their revenue somewhere between 160 and 100 million euro from June until August. Now, Delta has the most service of any U.S. airline to Paris, and it holds a joint venture with Air France. And together, the two carriers have approximately 70% market share in nonstop service between the U.S. and Europe. And France, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what does this mean for Paris if the airlines are complaining?
That's a good question. I mean, there are always people who are quick to point out that big sporting events like the Olympics or the Euro 2024 Cup that just wrapped up in Berlin this weekend, they'll say that it's good for a city's economy because it attracts tourists as well as some investors. But more often than not, these events are a financial drain on the host cities. A lot of the infrastructure that's built isn't going to be repurposed after the games have ended. And as for the sports venues that will remain, the city will have to spend funding on maintenance for years to come. And I mean, the cost of hosting the Olympics has just skyrocketed in recent decades. If you take the 2004 games in Atlanta, for example, that cost almost 18 billion euro. And then in Beijing, just 4 years later, the cost amounted to over 47 billion euros or so. And around 3 billion euro of the Olympic funding for the Games in Paris, that's coming from public taxpayers. But these taxpayers, even if they're working at a venue that might get a boost in revenue during the Olympic Games, they themselves are not likely to see a boost in salary either for the period that they're working or even in the long term.
Yeah, well, that's another perspective, Emily, I must tell you. But let's head to the markets now and see investor sentiment at intraday.
Well, stock futures are up as more than 40 S&P 500 companies are set to report their second quarter earnings this week. So investors are gearing up for a big week of key corporate earnings, companies like United Airlines and Netflix, Johnson & Johnson. And traders are also keeping an eye on the attempted assassination of U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump over the weekend. In political strife in the U.S. could be troublesome for some investors, as well as in France, although French yields have been steady again after falling the last 6 out of 10 sessions. This is also due to worries about the political situation there. And then the European Central Bank, they meet later this week, but they're not expected to make any change to monetary policy.
All right, Leshna, thank you so much for that update. So we come to Africa now, where in Kenya, motorists will have to part with an additional 7 Kenyan shilling to purchase petroleum products, despite the government's move to reduce pump prices. The Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, the EPRA, released a review of pump prices for July 2024, which saw super petrol, diesel, and kerosene drop by about 1 shilling, 1.5 shilling, and 1.3 shilling, respectively. The drop revised super petrol prices to 188.84, diesel is now 171.60, and kerosene is 161.75 shillings. That's in Nairobi. That's for liters, for a liter each. However, EPRA did not spare motorists after revising the road maintenance levy up by 7 shillings. This means that consumers of petrol and diesel will pay 25 shillings in tax for the road maintenance, and that's up from the previous amount of 18 Kenyan shilling. Now, President Samia Suluhu of Tanzania has instructed the National Food Reserve Agency to increase its grain storing capacity to reach 3 million tons by 2030. The head of state issued the directives after inspecting the ongoing construction of the modern silos and warehouses in Panda municipality in Katavi region, which will increase storage capacity from the current 5,000 tons of grains to 28,000 tons. The modern silos have significantly increased the grain storage capacity from 5,000 to 28 tons. And moreover, Dr. Samia said that the budget for Agriculture Ministry has increased by 3-folds in the past 3 years, from 460 billion in 2020-2021 financial year to 1.24 trillion this fiscal year, directing the money to be well spent in building irrigation schemes, promoting extension services, procurement of fertilizers, and construction of food storage facilities. Now, major banks are continuing to provide finances to fossil fuel companies despite increasing pressure to defund oil and gas firms in support of international decarbonization efforts. A new report from the U.S. organization Rainforest Action Network, RAN, and partners reveals that in the last years following the 2015 Paris Agreement, 60 of the largest private banks in the world provided $6.8 trillion in funding to fossil fuels. Over the past 8 years, approximately $3.3 trillion went to fossil fuel expansion, and this bank supported over 4,200 fossil fuel companies with loan, security, transactions, or underwriting. And Nigeria's GDP also looking at the fossil fuel divestment in Nigeria. We see that has also received some of that funding. Let's head to the crypto space now and see what's going on there. We do know that that assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump moved Bitcoin over the weekend. I wonder if that impact has weared off at this time.
Well, it's not wearing off. It's green on the screen at this point. And I remember in 2023, we had analysts talk about half the world going to the polls in 2024. Definitely would expect volatility, in most of these markets. We're already seeing that play out right now with politics in the U.S., but definitely Bitcoin is riding high.
So Ladi, you weren't here on Friday when we had the crypto conversation. I was complaining to analysts how bored I was getting,
Right.
but I didn't see this coming. I didn't see there was going to be a big move, over the weekend because of course, a major thing right there.
Right.
And
So I guess you're not that bored anymore.
No, I'm
at
not.
This point.
No, boredom is
so
gone.
So he's not bored anymore. But yeah, it's green on the screen at this point. Bitcoin, 4.16%, big jump right there. Did get sub 60K for a while. Almost lost the $50,000 level, but we're now seeing a spike in the market. Let's look at the sentiment right now. It's been neutral for a while now, and I guess it's still a neutral market, 52 points of 100 using the fear greed index. Let's look at some top stories now. Definitely all eyes will be on Jerome Powell this week, mixed inflation data from last week, but markets will be paying close attention to Powell's language when it comes to cues over how U.S. financial policy might change going forward. All investors want to know is, when are the rate cuts coming in the U.S.? Then we see Bitcoin hash rate that's increased. It staged a comeback at this point with Bitcoin rising to over $60,000. Miners have risen out of the purgatory, at this point. Finally, looking at the market differently, Bitcoin hash rate measures how many guesses are submitted per second to the entire blockchain. A higher hash rate indicates the need for more computing power. That means increased energy cost and longer verifications. That's for Bitcoin mining. Then Hamster Combat app, we saw over the weekend, the app stalled. Hamster Combat is a viral Telegram-based crypto game where you can mine hamster coins by managing a virtual crypto exchange. But users were surprised over the weekend when the app was not working. But definitely we see the developers worked on that and it started working all over again. Let's bring in Solomon Amunde now to bring us up to speed. Great to have you, Solomon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ladi.
So we know the crypto industry is known for scams and rug pulls, at this point. I'm looking at Hamster Combat. Might this just be another scam? Is it possible?
Sincerely, I doubt Hamster would be a scam. I doubt it's actually a scam. One of the major reasons why I doubt that is because the Telegram CEO has come out himself to share his insights about Hamster, and he has also raised praises on the platform for helping onboard over 200 million users to the Web3 space. And you're talking about just within 90 days, about 3 months, they have onboarded about 239 million users. So for the Telegram CEO to come out and make such comments and remarks about Hamster, I think he has done his due diligence. And I feel at this point it would be wrong for anyone to say it's actually a failed project or it's actually a project that might end up scamming people. I doubt that.
All right, but we did hear the Telegram CEO say that the Hamster Combat game onboarded over 250 million people into Telegram. So I'm wondering, onboarding over 250 million people, then we also have the users that have been using that app for a while now. Do you think they'll be able to compensate all of these users? Because it seems like it's a lot.
Yes, in this picture, I feel just a tiny fraction of those users will be able to get the airdrop of the Hamster token. Probably maybe 5% of those users they'll be able to get that. But then again, if you look at the Hamster project, they're making so much money. Look at their YouTube, they have lots of numbers, they have lots of views you get. So I can tell that they have made at least over $1 million from YouTube and other social media platforms too. They have lots of views, they have lots of videos. I would say so far so good, and also the partnerships that have been doing within the past few days. I would say they should have enough money to be able to compensate all the players of the game.
I can imagine how difficult it is distributing these coins to over 250 million people. But we know there are other tap-to-earn platforms right now, and definitely there'll be some that might just be a waste of time. How do you identify the right tap-to-earn platforms?
Actually, it's difficult to be able to identify the right tap-to-earn projects. At that early and initial phase, it's actually very difficult because currently I'm certain we have over 10 of such platforms. Most of them don't last more than 2 weeks. Some would last for about 3 months, even more than what they wouldn't reward. nothing is actually guaranteed.
All right, so definitely we're seeing a comeback in the market now with Bitcoin. We're seeing the hash rate also coming up. What altcoins do you think are primed to rise with Bitcoin rising from the ashes? Hello, Solomon. All right. Seems we have some issues with Solomon there, but definitely, I'm sure everyone wants to know what coins to be watching, at this point. But let's head back to the markets now. We see definitely improvement, when it comes to price action. So 4.16%, big 4% movement. BNB has not left out. Okay, I think I have Solomon again. Hello, Solomon. Right. So I was asking what altcoins do you think are going to outperform Bitcoin with this rise we see?
Okay, so currently, one of the altcoins I'm being very optimistic about is Chromia. And that's majorly because their blockchain goes live tomorrow, the mainnet goes live tomorrow. So I'm very optimistic that it should perform better than Bitcoin, and it should outperform most other altcoins out there because there's a reason for it to have that incredible surge, which is the mainnet happening tomorrow. So that's like the major project I'm optimistic about for this week. All
right. Thank you so much, Solomon Monday. Always great having your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah, so definitely in a tap to earn, that whole industry is definitely not easy, at this point. You have so much to do, on these games and these platforms. Then at the end of the day, you don't get any compensation.
Well, maybe just take it as a game. You're playing a game.
Right, with no expectation.
With no expectation, just relaxing.
Right.
Just a way for you to relax.
Just relax.
Mm-hmm. All right, Ladi, thank you so much. So that is on the program this very first day of the week. Of course, we do have 4 more episodes coming your way. You don't want to miss any of them. I do remember right here on the business programs on Channels Television, we're out for food security. We're preaching that message. We need to eat. We need to eat well. So we'll continue with that push right here on the program so you don't want to miss it. But I'll see you tomorrow. I'm in John McQuan. Enjoy the rest of your day.